Got it, Cody. Okay, it looks like we're kind of live and in living color. Can you guys hear us okay? We had a little technical glitch. Okay, cool. Anybody else hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, great. Great. All right, well, we're going to get started because it's now 10:32. So we want to get all this going. Today's guest is Bruce Roseland. Now, I've known Bruce for a while now, and I have to say that if you have not met Bruce Roseland, it's a good thing you're not dead yet, because they would send you back to meet him at some point, because you would have missed a salient and important point for us being alive in on this earth, let alone in South Dakota, because he is quite a character, has a lot of different, let's say, you don't really think of people who are ranchers as kind of eclectic and people who they just think a little bit different than everybody else. You would never think that. But Bruce Roseland is a person who will introduce you to the fact that whatever you thought about ranchers is probably wrong. Because he's a whole example of how there's a whole breadth of like interesting ideas and things. You may not get it all at once, but if you talk to him for a little while, I never go away. I've never gone away from having a conversation with Bruce where I didn't feel like somehow I got lifted off the floor, because he has some really interesting things to say. And sometimes they're just like he'll just drop a word or something, or drop a phrase or something. But anyway, you guys have the opportunity today to experience Bruce, and experience is an apropos word. I mean, that is what it is. Bruce, welcome. Let's get started by giving the kind of, I guess you can say, the 50,000-foot view of Bruce Roseland. Like, tell us a little bit where you're born, where you grew up, what do you do, your kids, and that kind of, just kind of like the elevator speech of Bruce Roseland. Then we'll get under the hood, so to speak.
Okay. I live on the family homestead, though it's been expanded. Fourth generation, north central South Dakota, southwest corner in Falk County, if you know where that is. Basically, if you draw a line between Aberdeen and Pierre, I'm about halfway there. Went to Brookings for college. Yeah, I got quite a varied background. I went to Brookings to college for a while. I transferred up to the University of North Dakota, got a master's in sociology and a minor in statistics. Basically, it qualified me to be a mid-level bureaucrat, which you probably all hate. Anyway, I had an opportunity. I was the only son of a rancher farmer, and he always wanted me to come back. So I graduated, and then I did a 180. I came back to the farm, got back here just in time for the farm crisis to occur. I would have to say 3 out of 5 people my age left that I knew personally. So it was that has formed a lot of my thought, having survived that. I started writing, probably more pertinent to the point. I started writing. I always, had it, I wrote in my head, the best way I can put it. I did some writing in college, but I quit for quite a while. And then I had a bit of a health scare in my early 2000s. And so I thought, well, who is going to tell the story of this area 20 years from now? I didn't have grandchildren, but that's what I started doing. And I naturally write free verse poetry. I started out writing prose, but I find I'm a minimalist. I strip everything out. So it ends up being like 15 or 20 lines. I've written 7 books, 3 of them won national awards. Most, not all, most of the books have to deal with, the rural area, nature, well, the life and times of a rancher. But right at the beginning, when I first got a book out, and I went out to try to, to sell it. And I actually, we traveled around state. Uh, Back then we actually have some independent bookstores. So, I'd sit out there and maybe sell 3 or 4 books in an afternoon. Went here, went there, went here and there. And the thing I discovered was that there was really a lack of places to read, connections. And that was common. And, somebody may be doing something like I was doing, or people were writers, but they were in isolation. You know, um, 50 miles away, they didn't know somebody else who was doing the same thing. So that kind of got me started with the South Dakota State Poetry Society. So I dropped in on it. Ended up serving on the board of directors as treasurer, and now I'm into the 3rd term as president of South Dakota State Poetry Society. And the whole thing, my whole emphasis on this, going through it, is try to make it more possible for people across the state to, write poetry. Have places to have it published, have places to have it read. Because we're a small state, we're a small market. I tell everybody, if you want to be a writer, especially if you're going to write poetry, keep your day job. And it's a fun hobby. It's a great way to meet people. I love being around creative people. And when I say creative people, artists, I have a wide definition. I feel carpenters are artists. I feel welders are artists. There's that creative spark that's in folks that just want to come out. In my particular case, I recorded my life basically. To some extent, it's memoir writing by free verse poetry, and I think a lot of people have that inclination. To put it simple, not many of us. Oh my goodness! I just see I got it plugged. Well, I am plugged in. Excuse me.
You're running out of juice.
Well, I had a low battery come on, but anyway, I'll keep going here. If something happens, it happens. But I am plugged in.
Is the cord plugged into your computer though?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, it looks like it is.
Okay.
We had a bit of a problem this morning. My regular computer went kablip and needs to go to shop, so I'm on my wife's laptop, which I don't normally use. Anyway, we digress, don't we? So what I was saying is, not many of us, I think very few of us got a novel in us, but many of us have stories to tell, and we want to tell those stories. And poetry is a great way of doing it. It's something that's achievable. My goodness, if you write 15 minutes a day, or just off and on when something strikes you, over a course of a lifetime, you're going to have a lot. And that's how I write. I just I write something that strikes me, I write it down, I throw it on my pile. And I don't think I write much, but over a course of time, it ends up being quite a pile. And I get a big enough pile and make a book out of it. In the early 2000s, I was looking around for places to be. So it was the second festival of books, you know, and I went to it. And I didn't intend to. I sat in on the poetry track sessions, and I ended up being there the whole time. Went for the whole day on it. And the next year I found I did the same thing. But I also realized it was low attendance. And I just something that hit me. Unless somebody loves something, it has a tendency to wither away. And that kind of goes back to what I was talking about, making network and connections. A lot of people may be right, but if they're in isolation, you have a tendency to think, well, nobody cares, doesn't matter. And you don't know if it's good, you don't get feedback, you don't know how to change things. So having these opportunities, feedback, a place to be, is so important to people. In other words, to be heard. So I got involved in the poetry track, and as I got with the South Dakota State Poetry Society, we have, I was thinking, well, what can we do to help? And that was volunteers. So we, put our board of directors volunteered into the poetry track to staff it. So that's what we did. Then we started talking about to the folks about maybe who we'd like to hear, and let them know those we've run into across the state of South Dakota, that be somebody that people would like to hear and be noticed.
So you're
So,
saying,
yeah,
you're saying, Bruce, you're saying you proposed that to the South Dakota Humanities Council, that they would bring in local poets? Is that what you're saying?
Well, the folks, yeah. Well, the folks I started talking to was, Jennifer Woodman, who is the director, and she's very open to it. And so we have that
Director of,
relationship.
you're saying director of the book festival?
Yeah,
Yeah.
so the director of the South Dakota Festival of Books, yeah. And Jennifer had been in there for a long time, so it's been a working relationship. Also, one of the things that we got to thinking about was starting up a chapbook. Well, South Dakota Humanities, well, they give out grants. So they were the seed money for starting up the chapbook, our first chapbook, which is ongoing. And it's very competitive. There's a number of people who put in for that every year. And I think we ended up with good quality work. The one qualification of it is that you have to be a South Dakota resident, and that's something I keep emphasizing, because we're such a small market, and the big markets are in the coast, Minneapolis, Denver, whatnot. What it comes down to, if we don't help ourselves, who's going to help us? So we got to help each other. And so the Poetry Society, they printed out a chapbook. And the other thing that we have started up with them is something called the Past Press. And that brand new, our first book will be out this year, and it's going to debut in this fall's South Dakota Festival of Books.
Tell us a little bit about that, Bruce. What is the Past Press?
Oh, well, that too is a promotion of South Dakota writers, poets, and it's competitive, reviewed. So yeah, you gotta work on it. We have, but it's going to have to be after this seed money. It's going to have to finance itself. We have another person who is going to be that's in the wings as soon as we get this one paid for. Jody Andrews is the author of the one coming up here. So I haven't seen the book, but I'm very excited. It's going to be out soon. So that's two things.
Go ahead.
Well, that's two at the Festival of Books in the South Dakota Humanities Council has helped us with. During the Festival of Books, the Poetry Society had the vendors table there. And we found that a really great, good place to hang out, make connections. Good. It's good. It's not too many places in South Dakota where you can get a crowd of book lovers, readers to come walking by and see your wares and talk to them in person. So that's been a good thing. We also sponsor with the Festival of Books, an open mic on Friday night. We've done that for years, and that's been exciting. Like I said, there's a lot of people who've been in there who've never read before in front of an audience, and it means so much.
Well, one of the things I noticed in that is that we got a number of young people, even like junior high school kids, who showed up and they read, and providing a platform for like that accepts all comers. And you have, especially if you can get young people to actually show up and read at eye level for adults, that's a thing. That's worth, to me, that's worth having a book festival for, because you don't get that often. And as a result, as adults, we think young people are not doing anything, especially anything useful or practical, because we're not watching. They're doing all kinds of stuff, but we're not seeing it. So when we have some kind of platform, and even one or two of them will bring their poetry, well, that's, to me, that's always worth the price of admission, as they say.
That's interesting. When I was in high school, the local arts council had arts in the park, had just a small reading. There was a few people there, and but it was sponsored by the Arts Council, South Dakota, the Fall County Art Council, and I read there. And I have an old saying: "Is as the twig is bent, so grows the oak."
You must have been in the bonsai.
Must have been what now, Lawrence?
It's a bonsai, growing bonsai trees. But anyway, go ahead. They don't use oak, but it'll work, I think. Go ahead.
Well, the thing is that we all have multiple talents. I've been a little kid and a high school wrestling coach for like over 30 years. Now, think about that. I was in high school and I walked into that park and I read. Well, and I didn't think much about it then, but just, 1970, wouldn't that have been a brave act for a high school jock to do? Walk in and read a little poetry in the park.
Takes more courage than wrestling,
Well, that's the whole thing. Is that culture is something we have to encourage, and it's like throwing a rock out, a pebble into a pond. We don't have any idea where those waves will end up.
Yes.
And so that was a little pebble that got thrown out in that park. And here I am many years later, been involved in all these things. And with that, I don't know, but yeah, my twig got bent a little bit. So I think that's what I got to say about all these programs you put on. They're not necessarily measured by how many people show up, by dollar success or whatever. The reactions, the consequences of them can be 40, 50 years later. I mean, memories, your experiences are powerful things, and sometimes it takes a long time to end up with them expression, which is kind of how I started writing, because I didn't basically write for 30 years practically after I left college, and then boom, I sat down and I started writing my experiences. Um, Now, saying that, if I hadn't had South Dakota State Poetry Society, if I didn't have the humanities, and if I didn't have the Festival of Books, would I had been so encouraged to continue? Good question,
Mm.
you know, and that's something to be thought about. So yeah, whatever we can do in this state to encourage people. There's one other thing I should probably mention.
Okay.
And then when I was talking about people have many talents, we all have a tendency to live in silos. And that's an agrarian term, you know, you usually serve or silage and silos. Well, a lot of us live in silos. That silo might be our community, might be at the whatever university that you're attending, could be your occupation, could be the friends you hang out. But that has a tendency to be in that silo that going up like that, and you don't necessarily reach out. So and over on the next farm, there's another silo, and you're totally separate. So how are you going to make those connections between those silos? You know, and this is my firm belief. We build the culture of any place we're at. So if you're talking about statewide, we build it, and it's deliberate. It's conversation, reaching out, it's events, it's organizations. You know, they all have that vision. You know, and I think it's so important because that's what gives us that continuity. That's how we learn what we were, what we are, and what we're becoming. It's something that we do, something that we build, and so however you can do it. So like I say, I got a wide definition of what's creative, what is culture, you know.
Well,
Yeah,
I
go
want to
ahead.
open it up to our other esteemed co-conspirators here. I don't want to hog all the time here. So if anyone has any questions or comments on anything that Bruce has said or ideas that have sparked, chime right in. Keep in mind, this is a conversation thing. We're all just sort of trying out ideas here. So anybody have something that they want to add to this conversation at this point, go ahead, Misty.
This is great. This is my first time joining the group, and I'm soaking it up
Welcome.
like a sponge. I appreciate it so much.
Yeah.
I'm new to the library world, and one thing that caught my attention was you said the open mic night. Where do you do that? And I apologize, I popped in a little late, so I didn't catch the introduction of where you live.
Yeah.
And so I'm interested in that. I'm in the small town of Winter, and the library world is fun, and I'm wanting to build that culture you're talking about right here in the small town of middle of nowhere. And so I just love the idea of a mic night and love the idea of opening it up to teens in particular. We're getting a teen group organized. And so just want to hear your thoughts on that. I think grabbing our young people is a great idea. They have so many wonderful ideas, and just if they had somebody come alongside them and show them the way and how they can express their words on paper and get them started younger. And so I'd be interested to hear more about that.
Bruce?
Well, two things here. The open mic that I was talking about is during the Festival of Books. We usually have it on a Friday night. The location is, well, it depends where we're given or where we're at, but it's accessible. The Festival of Books have always been very good to us, given a good place to speak. One thing I would suggest for an open mic is you keep everybody probably under 6 minutes, 7-8 minutes at the most, to keep it moving along, and use a whiteboard. People just come in and wherever they place themselves in an order of 1 to 20, whatever, that's when they speak. So that makes everything, it cuts down the time, makes everybody goes quicker. If you want to contact our society, we have something called chimp mail. And we would put that on our chimp mail and announce that. You can put it on Facebook, whatever. And so you'd be surprised how far people will travel to have a place to read. Because like I said, this is something you make, this is something you create. I we I also live in Spearfish and work with the Matthews Opera House, and so we put with another person, Marcia Mittman, we put something out on Facebook about starting up just a poetry group. I belong to a couple of prose groups, but anyway, we had like almost 40 responses. You know, it was like, wow. Now, how many people show up? I don't know, but there is a hunger out there. So, yes.
And I
Like I said,
think, you know, I think also poetry is growing too, especially with young people. Actually, that's one of the largest sectors because we just write them off because they call it rap, but that, you know, or hip hop or something like that. But if that's not poetry, then we're going to have to come up with a whole different idea of what poetry is, or, you know, because all of the check boxes that I learned in junior high school for what poetry is, they check twice. You know, we may not like their subject matter sometimes, but there are like people who do hip hop and rap poetry for church, for, you know, for religion. I mean, and their whole rap thing, all of their content is religious content. They're just using the form. So when people focus on, like, you know, an obscure person who's done maybe less than 1% of all the raps out there and say, oh, that's rap, then, you know, I think that they're just trying to write off those young people. But if you want to find, not only that, they actually make money, you know, lots of money, you know, doing their poetry, while other people say it's not profitable, and they get people to you know, to show up in stadiums to hear their poetry. So I think like that has like spurred a lot of young people to reconsider poetry and maybe redefine it. So it's kind of like if you tell, I've had conversations with people who, let's say they decorate saddles, but they won't call themselves an artist because for them that word has baggage. But I don't know, what do you call that if it's not art? You know what I mean? So I think it's the same way in poetry.
Poetry been live and well right out in front of us is called music. Many of the, you know, the lyrics is, I love reading song lyrics because I go, wow, a lot of them, it's incredible. And that's the way it should be. Poetry should hit at your heart, strike your emotion, and that's what successful music does. So, yeah.
Yeah.
The
The number,
what's that?
I was going to say, just to underscore what you said, a number of hymnals, if you look at the hymnals, they will say it's from this poem, you know, so it actually is a poem, and they will use the music over and over again. The thing that changes is the poem, you know. So I think that if we expand our idea of what poetry is and go to where it is, you know, and widen that, when you promote that you're going to have a poetry slam, or, you know, talk about that, and so that you can widen people's ideas and make them feel like, you know, that, yeah, they do have something to contribute.
I should probably say this, and that is that unless you read out loud your own poetry and have other people, you listen to them, it is so valuable because you find out what works, what doesn't work. That's why it's like anything else. I mean, artists, painters learn from painters, musicians learn from other musicians. So when you put people who like the written word and they put them together, something magical happens over a period of time. It develops, And that's why I like going to these places and listen to other people. I always learn something, you know. It's a good thing. It's not competition. You always want to do the best you can, but you be open to it, you know, because what may not work this time, somebody is going to go back home and work on it, and it'll work the next time. So, yeah.
Yep.
And
Anybody?
it helps to have cookies and coffee.
Yeah, not necessarily in that order, but it's yeah, those are important things to have. Anybody else have thank you for that, Misty. Anybody else? Kevin, you open your mic.
Yeah, Bruce, this is Kevin Worcester. You've got a one poem I'm thinking of is Just Another Day on the Ranch. And
Yeah.
And I'm interested in that because you do something that any farm kid has been involved in or watched, and it's a kind of a traumatic experience, and it was there, and not something you want to talk about when you're done with it if it doesn't work. And you didn't work, it didn't work for you, although you had another cow that gave twins, and that so in the end it worked out. Each cow had a calf, and you tore your hand up on the fence, and you with a tool or with the fence or something. And what I liked in that poem, apart from just the whole description of such a fairly common experience of trying to deal with a breached calf and how you do that, but was that you didn't want to talk to anybody for a while. You didn't want to see any neighbors. You didn't want anybody to show up. You know, you wanted to have a little time with yourself to move beyond that. Did you go right then and go start writing that poem, or was that something you had to sit on for a while before you came back to?
I consider myself an accidental poet. I really fell in this accidentally. What you read, 90% of 90% of what you read is what was there the first time. And after I got done with this experience, and the next day I was looking at it, and I went, well, it meant to be, and I went, well, there it is. That's the poem, and I just sit down and I just write it the way it happened, you know. And here's the secret of poetry: anything or a good song, whatever, is the emotion. If you feel the emotion, that's where you write from. That's what gives you the energy, and that's what makes it that you're able to pick out the right words. And always be honest. Don't use something that words you would never use or somebody in your occupation wouldn't use. And because of that, if you do that, and it's going to have that appeal, it's going to be authentic. And people, I think, realize that. But that was just another day in the life, you know. That was just oh geez, you talk to any rancher, that's what calving season is. It's just one day after that, and they love it, or they wouldn't be doing it, you know. And the thing of it is so many things work out that way. That's what I love about the occupation. You feel like you're part of creation at that time. It's to me, it's a great. It's given me a lot of freedom. You know, I think it's hard work and everything, but I like the people. Love the nature. I like cattle. You know, I had a chance to go the other direction, but probably if I hadn't had that chance to go the other direction, I wouldn't have the appreciation of what is in front of me every day out here, and not wanting to share it. But I have not the only occupation that has, you know, like I said, I got a broad view of being creative, and a lot of people are in other occupations. Ted Kuzer, you know, my goodness, he's written a lot of stuff, and people love him, and he writes just about the common everyday occurrences. So that's it. We all got stories to tell, and all we need to do is tell them. And it's interesting.
Yeah.
That's why I started writing, because I got to thinking. Like I said, I'm fourth generation. My great grandfather was a homesteader out here, And I got to thinking what it was like to have been here homesteading. And he would have probably, if you ask him, well, no big deal, nothing. But I would have loved to have heard a day in his life. You know, tell me the what, tell me the why, tell me a day in your life. And it's the realization that I am living in those times. 100 years from now, people are going to look back, my relatives, my great grandchildren, and they're going to say, I wish I could have known a day in his life. Well, that's what I'm giving them. I'm giving them a day in their lives. Whether or not you're a grandparent or whatever, or you want to pass that forward. You might think what you're doing right now in your occupation or in your retirement is dull. Well, it might not be so dull as you think it is, you know, because what is humdrum, what I just wrote down about pulling that calf and everything, that was just a day in my life. But, you know, I'm glad I wrote it down and other people are able to, you know, see just how, you know, well, yeah, that's ranching, you know, the day in my life.
You know, the other thing, well, you know, the other thing that people forget often too is that something that they think is like just a day in their life, for other people, we don't experience that at all. So it's like a unique, real unique thing for the person who has never smelled the grass and smelled the cow dung and, you know, then and reached in and grabbed a calf that's breached. You know, they've never experienced the inside of a uterus of a cow, and they probably never will, except through the vicarious talking about, you know, like, you know, some poem. And there's so many things like that, as you point out, Bruce, that, you know, that we just take for granted that we're doing, but someone who's not familiar with that might find it tremendously interesting, and especially young people who are basically cut off from life. I mean, it's sad how much young people are completely cut off from living, you know, and in our effort to, quote, protect them, they don't get to live. They never, doesn't matter if they've died or dead now, really. I mean, in some sense, you know.
I've coached a lot of little kids, high schoolers, and over the 30 years of wrestling, I still do that. I always tell them the same thing. Go find your passion. Go find your passion. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. Find your passion, something that want to make you walk out the door, you know, every day. And that's all you need to do, and the rest of the life is sweet. You know, that's all the advice you ever need to do.
Anybody else?
Yes.
Anybody else have a question or a comment for Bruce?
Yes, this is Gary Whitgriff from Rapid City. I've been fairly critical in a couple of my books with people on social media basically restricting their language to snippets rather than long-term thought. And so I think children are boxing themselves in when they only have 2 or 3 words to, or 2 sentences, for example, in a post. You mentioned at the beginning of your talk, Bruce, that you have piles that you create of what I'll call snippets. How do you tie those together?
How do I tie them together? Like I said, 85 to 90% of, I may be unusual, of any story. Well, I have rules, okay? And basically the story is the story. So what is the story? What is you're trying to say? What is that emotional heart? I believe that things have a beginning, a middle, and an end. So the thing I always look at is, did I tell the story? Did somebody read that? And that's why I say it's so important to speak it, to give it to an audience. Do they understand what I just said? And if they pause any place that they don't understand or something is missing, or add a little bit, but don't add any more than what is necessary. You know, like I said, I'm kind of a minimalist. And if there's something in that story that doesn't belong there because it's a side trail, take it out. The story is the story. Like that's a poem. If you're writing a novel, you could have many, many, many characters and many developments. But, I think most people's attention span is probably about 3 minutes, maybe. So there you go. You're going to have to grab them in that time. So that's that's the question. Is it complete?
But I think, Gary, if I'm understanding your question, is you have like a lot of little things that, that would appear from our conversation. They happen at different times, different locations, and almost by definition, you think of them as different events, like little dots. And you're asking, how do you create the thread, or how do you discover the thread might be another way to ask that question, because it's kind of like like if a detective walks into a crime scene and there are lots of little points, and depending on how you draw the points, draw lines between the points, will draw a different picture. And one of the things you're doing is what if scenarios. What if you drew the line this way? What would you see? What would you, if you drew it another way, what would you see? So if I'm understanding you right, you're asking, how do you determine what picture you're going to make by drawing a line between those poems, even like the way you set them up, which one goes first, which one goes second, maybe you leave some out, maybe you write another poem to tie them together or something like that. Is that kind of what you're asking, Gary, or am I off the mark?
Yes, you're on the right line, but we had a little earlier discussion about children and tying them into this this way of writing. And so to create a culture or to create really learning, you have to be able to tie your thoughts together rather than just saying a few words on social media. And so whether it's how you develop that storyline rather than just having blocks of things out there. And I think you're right, leave out the stuff that doesn't fit the story. And it's a lot different when you're writing 300 or 400 pages. You can add things that are really more than a footnote that you need in there to complete your chapter, for example. But poetry, I 100% agree. You cut out all the thes and everything you can to try to still get the message across. And so if there was any special tricks that you would like us to pass on, I'll be certainly willing to do it.
I think maybe the best way I could explain this is if you have a writer's eye or a poet's eye, it's like having a painter's eye or a photographer's eye. The photographer is always looking for that picture. And if you look at that picture that he takes, somehow in that picture, there is a story, there's something about it that it's framed. It doesn't seem disjointed or something. Like it tells something. A lot of the greatest photographers, or let's say war photographers, they're what they capture in that one shot tells so much that it may even change the course of a war or whatever. Now, I can think of a number of photos like that. Well, that's kind of like a poem. Does it tell that story? Does it tell a story there? Is there anything missing? So if it's a fragment, there should be, maybe that should be tied into something else, an explanation, there needs to be a story there. If you just got a fragment there, then it's just a fragment, if it runs on and on and on and on, what you're writing is a diary, that's different. So that's the best way I can put it. I myself, I'm just talking about my own definition. Everybody else has a different way of looking at poetry. I feel that it tells a story, and that story might be a part of your emotion. that you're feeling that day, or it may be something that you're going to have to hop a little a ways from. What I mean by that is that it leads you to another thought, that can still be successful. It could be nothing more than you walk outside, you look up, and you see some geese flying overhead in a spring. And that's the story. The geese signify spring, and it's another year. And that, for most, that's the connection.
But
To another human being. If you cannot connect to another human being with your story, then you were unsuccessful. So if you connect, you're successful. So if you're not connecting, well, then it isn't a successful poem.
But that point brings up another way to look at Gary's question too, is maybe any communication is a two-part process. The person saying something and the person hearing it. One of the things we often neglect is that the audience for those young people is not us. And so the way, they're talking to people who do find some value and they do receive a message from those two-word things, and they find it not the way they talk to go on or write a longer thing, because if you share a lifestyle with someone close enough, there's a lot of things that words get in the way. So it's a different way. So maybe it's a matter of like us learning to read different than for them to write different. That said, I'm always challenging young people, even if you don't connect to me, do you connect to your peers? Do you have a way to check in to make sure that you're understood? Also, it's useful to note that a lot of times we go on and people and our peers don't understand what we're saying. So
it's important to know your audience.
Yes.
Who you're writing for. You need to know your audience. I deliberately try to use words that another rancher, somebody out here, they're going to say, yeah, that's it. I don't, if I could pick a simpler word, a simpler adjective over a more complicated one, I use it, either the sky is light blue, whatever. I don't say the exact shade of it out of 100 different shades, because nobody's going to understand that shade anyway.
Yeah.
So that's kind of language. Know your audience. Lawrence makes a very good point. But I can't help but think, going back, I'm getting up there in age now. Going back to the the 60s music, 70s music, not very many adults of our time understood what was being said, and those lyrics meant a lot to us. It was culture.
Yep.
That shaped our culture.
Yep.
Shaped the way we thought about the world, what we thought about relationships, and those words we understood, So every generation has its own language. Every occupation has its own language. A lot of cities have their own language just because of the geographical area. And talking earlier about silos, we gotta make those connections between silos, and because that's how we create a statewide culture. That's how we learn who we are. That's what I like about South Dakota Humanities Council. They got all these programs out there. I've been out on the Speakers Bureau. I've been part of the One Book South Dakota, and it's just another opportunity.
Can you talk about those? Can you talk about those a little bit, Bruce? Like what kinds of impact have you found that they've made?
Well, I got started on that with she's no longer on the circuit, but it was Jane Green. She had a lot of she's from Clark, South Dakota. I got to know her, and we did a number of speaking things. It was a lot of fun. A lot of people show up. She was well known. She was a columnist, and she had a column. She put out a whole bunch of books, and so yeah, she was well known. So we got around it, and that was a way of financing it and a way of advertising it. You know, I've been to a number of places that, well, Arts Night in Watertown. I can give a shout out to that. That's been a really good a venue there. And I think they've had a hand in that. The one book, South Dakota, that's a good idea all by itself. I mean, everybody reads that same book, and a lot of the books are somehow or other connected with the upper Midwest. And it just, again, breaking out of our silos, you know, making these connections. So you go to a place, you all read the same books, you sit down and you find out what we have in common, what we don't. If we don't do these things, you know, they're not going to be done.
Yeah.
You know, it is spontaneous. Here, there, something might occur. But if you're going to try to seed out this whole area, that's what I'm a farmer rancher. You seed things, and out of that, stuff grows. And it might be 40, 50 years from now, you know, and you never know what it could be. There are people among us right now who are either thinking about it or going to do it, writing the next giant in the earth. That totally floored me when I read that. That was a day in the life of those people at Flandreau, first settlers. Harvey Dunn, I went to Brookings. I spent countless hours staring at those paintings because that was culture. That was my people who came across. And I sat there and I going, what is this guy trying to tell me? And that's what we still are, because it speaks to us. We need it, or we don't know who we are. We end up being virtual. We end up being created by someone else. But we take our environment that we grew up with, and the people we are around, and the history we're making, that makes us unique. We are unique. And because of that, we have stories to tell, you know, and we have a good place for people to live.
And I think what you're talking about in a way too, Bruce, is we can make the place to tell the stories. We can create the platform. If we don't see the platform, just like Misty was saying that she wants to do something in her area, the rest of us can do something in our area too. You know, like even if it's just having people come to our living room and invite some poets to come and share stuff. Sometimes we think we have to have a stadium like the rap stars, but we don't. We can just do it in our backyard, or we can do it in our living room. And then those people will learn that they can do it too. And then pretty soon you actually have a whole culture of poetry. So now you have a baseline of people that when you say, hey, look, let's go to a larger venue, you already have seeded people who are interested in poetry and can see poetry in a larger way. While we're looking at it, why don't we open it up, or let's open it up to anyone else who, we only have 5 minutes left. Todd, go ahead.
I just want to ask Bruce, how's the shoulder?
Oh. Using it.
All
Driving a
right,
tractor.
it's up here anyway.
I just walked. I'm mostly done with my calving season. Be a little while before I put them out on grass, and I spend my mornings mostly feeding them. So yeah, I had shoulder surgery last November. So I've been rehabbing it. My second rotator cuff surgery. I am like the typical beat up rancher. You know, I've had wear and tear. I do want to say something here. What we have learned in the last 2 years, for those who may have thought they didn't need people, oh, we found out through COVID, we need people. Yeah, so
We
that's
need each other.
yeah. I see Todd now and then. You know, he lives a little bit of ways from us, but he can keep it.
Well, good. We're going to wrap up here in 2 or 3 minutes here, Bruce. You've really shared, at least for me, you've shared some really important insight, as I expected that you would, because you always do for me. And so are there any other words, pearls that you can like lay on us in these last few minutes?
Last few minutes. Any other questions?
Bruce, I'd be interested. My buddy Nick Nemec, who lives not far from you guys down around Halliburton. Last time I talked to him, it was horrible dry. Are you terrible dry up there, or did you get some of that moisture? And how does that change your outlook as a rancher and a poet?
Well, you always got to be a fatalistic optimist, you know. We surprisingly, we were fairly wet last fall, terribly dry last summer, so it was hardly any pasture or grass, but we've had an inch lately. They're predicting 2 inches tomorrow morning. I hope so. South Dakota, if you're in agriculture, you live by the inch. And if you're a rancher, you definitely live by the inch. You know, rain and mud makes grass. And that's what the cattle eat. And you always need more of you. So yeah.
Mud. I'm all in for mud. You know, that's it. Mud is a good thing. Well, say that again, Bruce.
I said mud is good when you've been bone dry.
Oh yes,
You know?
Yeah, it is. It is. Well, this has been another excellent hour for me, and I hope that you all have gotten something out of it. I hope that you will try at least to look out for some poetry opportunities. I want to introduce a book, and I will probably say the name of this book 2 or 3 times over the next times we're on. But there's a book called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows, and I can't recommend that book highly enough, especially for people who think that they want to be poets. And the reason is because it will open your eyes to the other side of your head. It will make you familiar with feelings that you have had, you know that you had, but you may have not had a word for it. And so you've let it go. But the feeling is there, and it's been working with you. And it could help you to put, let's say, a handle on your feelings. It's called The Dictionary of Obscure Sorrows. Just as another point, I introduced that book. It was a little difficult because they don't have a regular soft cover version. But I introduced that book to the inmates in the prison. As you know, I do. Some of you know anyway. I do work in the prison, and I introduced that book, and it has become the #1 book. We just can't get enough of them because they don't have it in soft cover. But I've been in meetings where people open and close with reading a term from that book, like people will read a verse from the Bible. You know, it's a very powerful book. I can't recommend it enough. So with that, we'll see you next week, same time, same station.
Thank you, Lawrence, for moderating.